The bold and the beautiful. A heart-wrenching decision. Finn stood quietly at the window of his office, staring out into the horizon, his mind racing. The weight of the decision he was about to make hung heavily on his shoulders. He had always been the kind of person who prided himself on doing the right thing. He had been trained as a doctor, after all, to save lives, to heal, and to help others. Yet today, he found himself at a crossroads, torn between his oath as a medical professional and the overwhelming need to protect his family from the threat that Luna represented. Finn had always been a man of logic, but Luna's actions, her deceit, and the harm she had caused to his family had thrown his emotions into a whirlwind. He had to do something, had to act fast before it was too late. The day Luna had been arrested was one that would forever remain etched in Finn's memory. Her betrayal, her lies, and the damage she had inflicted upon his family were unforgivable. The once promising and innocent woman who had wormed her way into his life and heart was now a criminal, facing charges that could end her freedom for good. But there was one thing about Luna that Finn couldn't ignore, a factor that complicated everything: the fact that she was pregnant. He had learned of her pregnancy shortly before she was taken into custody. The news had struck him like a thunderclap. Finn had felt a deep, visceral shock upon hearing it. Luna was carrying his child, a child who would forever be tied to him and his family. That fact weighed on Finn's heart, adding a layer of complexity to the situation. The thought of becoming a father, of being responsible for a new life, should have been a source of joy. Yet, in this case, it felt like a curse. Finn had made a promise to his family, to his wife Steffi, to always put their well-being first. And right now, Luna's pregnancy posed a direct threat to that. He couldn't allow her to roam free and continue her reign of destruction, potentially endangering the lives of those he loved. His responsibility to protect his family, to safeguard Steffi and their children, came before all else. And so, Finn made a decision that would change everything. Luna had been in the hospital for a routine checkup, a preemptive medical examination before she was taken to jail. Finn had volunteered to oversee the checkup himself, citing concerns about Luna's health due to her weakened state. It was a perfect opportunity, one that would allow him to carry out his plan without anyone suspecting anything. As Luna lay on the examination table, Finn glanced down at her, his face betraying nothing. He could see the faint traces of vulnerability in her eyes, a quiet desperation that reflected her fear of what was to come. She was trapped, both by her own actions and by the impending consequences. But Finn's focus was elsewhere. His mind was cold and calculating. He had to think about what was best for his family. If Luna were allowed to continue her pregnancy, it would only be a matter of time before her presence disrupted the fragile peace that had settled over his life. The child she carried was a reminder of the chaos she had caused, a constant, living symbol of her transgressions. Finn couldn't allow that to happen. As he prepared the necessary medical instruments for the procedure, his mind briefly flickered to the past. He remembered the first time he had met Luna, the way she had seemed so innocent and full of potential. She had once been someone he could imagine a future with, someone who had promised to bring nothing but light into his life. But that was before her betrayal, before she had put his family in jeopardy. And now, as she lay before him, Finn realized that the Luna he had once known no longer existed. With a steady hand, he administered the sedative, watching as Luna's eyelids fluttered closed and her breathing slowed. He felt a pang of guilt, but he pushed it aside. There was no room for weakness now. He had made his choice, and he was going to see it through. As Luna drifted into unconsciousness, Finn began the procedure. His hands moved with precision, the years of medical training and experience guiding him through the process. He knew that what he was doing was controversial, even dangerous. But in his mind, it was necessary. He had to eliminate the threat she posed to his family, to his life. The hours that followed were a blur. The procedure was complicated, and Finn had to fight to keep his emotions in check. It wasn't just the physical aspect of the task that wore on him, it was the moral weight of what he was doing. He had always been taught to preserve life, not to take it. But this wasn't just any life. This was Luna's life, and the life of a child that he couldn't bring himself to welcome into the world. As the procedure concluded, Finn stood over Luna's still form, his heart heavy with the burden of his actions. He had done what he believed was necessary, but at what cost? Could he live with himself after this? Could he face his wife, Steffi, knowing what he had done? For now, those questions remained unanswered. What mattered was that he had secured his family's future. Luna would not be free to cause further harm. The baby she carried would never pose a threat to his family. And as Finn watched the quiet rise and fall of Luna's chest, he knew that the consequences of his actions would haunt him forever. A choice driven by love, by fear, and by the overwhelming need to protect those who mattered most. Finn had always been a man of integrity, but sometimes integrity wasn't enough. Sometimes survival required sacrifice, and that was a price Finn was willing to pay. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows across the room, Finn stood alone, his heart heavy with the knowledge that his life, and Luna's, would never be the same again. He had crossed a line, one that could never be undone. And as the echoes of his decision reverberated in the silence of the room, Finn couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold for him, for his family, and for Luna's unborn child. Would the consequences of his actions come back to haunt him? Only time would tell. But for now, he had to live with the choices he had made and the unbearable weight of the life he had taken. Finn stood in the dimly lit hospital room, his hands trembling ever so slightly as he prepared the medical equipment. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, emotions pulling him in every direction. He had always prided himself on being a man of integrity, of principle. He had devoted his life to healing, to saving lives, and yet today, he stood on the precipice of something that would forever change the course of his life. The woman who had once been a part of his world, Luna, was now pregnant with his child. That fact alone had forced Finn into a position he never expected to find himself in. The news of Luna's pregnancy had hit him like a freight train. It was unexpected, shocking, and completely unwelcome. Finn had been living a life of peace with his wife Steffi and their children, and Luna's sudden return, along with the revelation of the pregnancy, was a complication he couldn't ignore. The thought of a child from Luna, a woman who had brought so much chaos into his life, was something Finn could not accept. His first instinct, naturally, was to protect his family. He couldn't allow Luna, with her history of deceit and manipulation, to carry this child to term. The risk was too great, the potential for further destruction to his family too high. So Finn made a choice that would tear at the very core of his morals and values. He had decided to act. The moment Luna was brought in for a routine checkup before her imprisonment, Finn saw an opportunity. He was the one who would oversee the procedure. He justified it to himself by telling himself that Luna's weakened state required close attention, and he would be the best person to manage her medical care. But deep down, Finn knew what he was planning was far from ordinary. He was about to take matters into his own hands in a way that went against everything he believed in. As Luna lay on the examination table, Finn couldn't help but notice the way she looked at him. There was a fear in her eyes, a vulnerability that he had never seen before. For a brief moment, he almost felt pity for her. She had always been strong, manipulative even, but now, she was at his mercy, completely helpless. Finn quickly pushed the thought aside. There was no room for pity now. His family was at risk, and that had to come first. Luna was not the same woman she once was who was a danger to everything Finn held dear. The pregnancy she carried was just another weapon in her arsenal, another way she could tear apart his life. He couldn't allow it. With steady hands, Finn administered the sedative, watching as Luna's breathing slowed and her eyelids fluttered closed. The sense of finality washed over him. He had made the decision, and now there was no turning back. As she slipped into unconsciousness, Finn's heart was heavy, but his mind was clear. He had to do this for Steffi, for his children, for his future. His love for his family was his driving force, and he would do whatever it took to protect them. As the procedure began, Finn couldn't help but feel a strange sense of detachment. He was acting in cold blood, performing a medical procedure that, under normal circumstances, he would never have even considered. But these weren't normal circumstances. This was his family's future on the line. He had no choice but to push his ethical boundaries aside, to perform the abortion without Luna's knowledge or consent. The minutes felt like hours as Finn carried out the procedure. His hands worked with practiced precision, but inside, he felt a deep, gnawing conflict. He had taken an oath to preserve life, to help those in need. And here he was, taking a life in order to protect his own. The weight of that realization hit him like a punch to the gut. As the procedure concluded, Finn stood over Luna's unconscious form, his chest heaving with a mixture of relief and guilt. He had done what he thought was necessary, but the cost was far greater than he had anticipated. He had crossed a line that he would never be able to erase. What he had done to Luna was irreversible. There was no going back. Finn looked down at the woman who had once been his lover, the woman who had tried to destroy his family. She lay there, vulnerable and still, her fate sealed by his hands. He couldn't help but feel a wave of guilt wash over him. He had always prided himself on his moral compass, on his commitment to doing the right thing. But today, he had failed himself. He had violated his own principles, and for what? To protect his family. To ensure that Luna's influence would no longer threaten them. Maybe. But as Finn stood there, staring down at Luna, he realized that no amount of justification could wash away the guilt he now carried. The decision to end Luna's pregnancy, to take that life, was one that would haunt him forever. As the door to the room closed behind him, Finn's mind was consumed by the weight of what he had done. He couldn't help but wonder if he had made the right choice. He had acted out of fear, out of a desperate need to protect those he loved, but in doing so, he had betrayed the very values he had sworn to uphold. Finn knew that he could never fully erase the consequences of his actions. No matter how much time passed, no matter how much he tried to justify what he had done, the guilt would always be there. And as he walked down the sterile hospital hallways, the echo of his footsteps felt like the soundtrack to his inner turmoil. The conflict between his love for his family and his adherence to his own moral code had torn him apart. Finn had always prided himself on being a man who did the right thing, but today, he had chosen a path that would forever change the man he was. He had sacrificed his own integrity in order to protect those he loved, but at what cost? Would Steffi ever forgive him if she knew what he had done? Would he be able to live with the knowledge that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? Finn didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure: his life would never be the same. The shadows of his actions would follow him, and the price of his decision would be something he would carry with him for the rest of his days. Finn had made a choice, and now he would have to live with the consequences. Luna's eyes fluttered open slowly, the sterile, unfamiliar light of the hospital room blinding her momentarily. Her head felt heavy, a dull ache pounding through her temples, but it was the emptiness within her that sent a shockwave through her entire body. There was something wrong. A feeling of disorientation swept over her as she tried to piece together the fragments of what had happened. The last thing she remembered was the examination room, the cold chill of the metal table beneath her, and Finn's man who had once been so caring, so trustworthy. But now, as she regained consciousness, something was missing. There was no joy, no relief, just a nagging emptiness that made her stomach turn. Luna tried to sit up, but the dizziness hit her like a tidal wave, forcing her back onto the pillow. Her breath caught in her throat as she grasped for understanding, struggling to make sense of what had happened in her absence. The beeping of the heart monitor beside her seemed louder than usual, the sound pulsing in sync with the fear creeping through her veins. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. Her gaze flickered toward the nurse who was nearby, working at a counter. Luna's voice was weak as she called out, her voice barely a whisper. "What happened to me?" The nurse turned, her face tense, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Luna couldn't quite place. You underwent a procedure. Finnegan was the one who performed it. You were unconscious during the whole thing. Luna's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Finn's name. It was like a cold slap to the face. What procedure? She asked, her voice trembling now. The nurse hesitated, clearly unsure of how much to say. But Luna's growing unease was palpable, her instincts warning her that something wasn't right. The nurse began slowly. You had a miscarriage. The procedure was necessary. Luna's mind went blank for a moment. Miscarriage. The word echoed in her head, but it didn't make sense. She wasn't miscarrying anything. She had been pregnant, yes, but she hadn't been in any danger. Luna's hand instinctively moved to her stomach, and the emptiness she felt there hit her like a freight train. Her breath caught in her throat as she felt the cold, harsh reality crash down upon her. It wasn't a miscarriage. It was something worse. It was something that had been done to her without her consent. A sense of betrayal flooded her chest, hot and heavy. She had been pregnant with Finn's child, and now the child was gone. But why? Why had he done this to her? Why hadn't he told her? Luna's mind raced with the storm of questions, but there was one she knew she had to answer before any of the others. Who had done this to her? The answer was painfully clear. Finn. Finn had taken control of her body. He had performed the procedure without her knowledge or consent. He had made a decision about her body, about her future, without even giving her a chance to decide for herself. The anger that surged through her was immediate and overwhelming. How could he have done this? How could he have crossed that line? Finn had always been so careful, so meticulous. She had trusted him. But now all of that trust seemed like nothing but a cruel joke. As the reality of her situation set in, Luna knew she couldn't let this go. She couldn't let him get away with this. Not after everything he had done. Not after everything he had taken from her. It wasn't just about the child, though. That was a loss she would never be able to recover from. It was about the violation, the utter disregard for her autonomy, her rights. It was about Finn's betrayal of the most sacred trust she had placed in him. As soon as she was able to stand, Luna found her strength. She pushed herself up from the bed, her legs shaky beneath her, but her resolve hard as stone. She had to find Finn. She had to make him face what he had done. As she staggered out of the hospital room, the walls closing in on her, Luna's mind focused only on one thing, Finn. He had to answer for what he had done. She found him in his office, standing at the window, looking out at the city. He didn't even turn as she entered. He had to know that she was coming. He had to feel the storm that was about to hit him. Finn, Luna said, her voice cold, controlled, but seething with anger. Finn turned, his face draining of color as he saw her standing in the doorway. The look in her eyes sent a shiver down his spine. There was no pity, no love, only cold fury. Luna, you're supposed to be resting. You shouldn't be out of bed, he said, his voice unsteady. Luna took a step forward, her words like a whip cracking through the air. You took my child. You took my right to decide what happens to my body. You did this to me. Finn's face paled even further, the weight of her words sinking into him. He had known that this day would come. He had known that Luna would eventually find out. But he hadn't been prepared for the intensity of her reaction. He hadn't been prepared for the sheer force of her anger. Luna, he began, but she cut him off. No, she snapped. Don't you dare try to justify this. Don't you dare tell me you did it to protect me or to protect anyone else. You made the decision for me. You took everything from me, and you didn't even give me a chance to fight for it. Finn's heart pounded in his chest. He had expected her to be upset, but he hadn't expected this level of rage. He could see it in her eyes now, the raw hurt, the betrayal. Luna, please, he said, taking a step toward her, his voice softer now. But she backed away, her face hard as stone. Don't, she said through gritted teeth. Don't you dare tell me what I should feel. You don't get to tell me anything anymore. Finn's heart twisted with guilt. He had tried to protect her, to protect his family. But now, as he stood before her, he realized that the price of that protection was far too high. I did it because I thought it was the only way, he said quietly, his voice cracking under the weight of his actions. I thought that if I didn't, you would keep hurting us. I thought this was the only way to make sure my family was safe. Luna's laugh was bitter, cold. Safe? You think that doing this to me is what makes us safe? You think that taking away my right to choose, taking away my child, somehow makes everything better? Finn opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He had no defense, no way to explain himself. In that moment, he realized the truth. He had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. I'll make sure the world knows the truth, Luna said, her voice low, dangerous. I'll make sure everyone knows what you did to me, Finn. You're not going to get away with this. Finn felt his heart race, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. The weight of his actions, of his betrayal, had finally caught up with him. There was no escaping it now. Luna turned on her heel and walked out of the room, her back straight, her steps purposeful. Finn stood there, the weight of her words crushing him. He had thought that what he had done was necessary. He had thought he was protecting his family. But now, as Luna's footsteps faded into the distance, he realized that he had lost something far more precious than he could ever have imagined. He had lost Luna, and with her, he had lost any hope of redemption.